and 2 younger boys, who, inevitably dissociated from their parents, had been for the past 2 years with a devoted aunt, their father's maiden sister, at Heidelberg. The reunion of the family was to take place with jollity in Paris, whither this good lady was now hurrying with her drilled and demoralized charges. Mrs. Knocker had come to England to see them 2 years before, and the period at Heidelberg had been planned during this visit. With the termination of her husband's service, a new life opened before them all, and they had plans of comprehensive rejoicing for the summer. Plans involving, however, a continuance for a few months of useful foreign opportunities, during which various questions connected with the organization of a final home in England were practically to be dealt with. There was to be a salubrious house on the Continent, taken in some neighbourhood that would both yield a stimulus to plain Fanny's French (her German was much commended) and permit of frequent running over for the General. With these preoccupations Mrs. Knocker, after her delightful encounter with Lady Greyswood, was less keenly conscious of the variations of destiny than she had been when, at the age of 20, that intimate friend of her youth, beautiful, lovable, and about to be united to a nobleman of ancient name, was brightly, almost insolently, alienated. The less attractive of the 2 girls had married only several years later, and her marriage had perhaps emphasized the divergence of their ways. To-day, however, the inequality, as Mrs. Knocker would have phrased it, rather dropped out of the impression produced by the somewhat wasted and faded dowager, exquisite still, but unexpectedly appealing, who made no secret (an attempt that in an age of such publicity would have been useless) of what she had had, in vulgar parlance, to put up with, or of her having been left badly off. She had spoken of her children. She had had no less than 6, but she had evidently thought it better not to speak of her husband. That somehow made up, on Mrs. Knocker's part, for some ancient aches. It was not till a year after this incident that, one day in London, in her little house in Queen Street, Lady Greyswood said to her 3rd son Maurice, the one she was fondest of, the one who on his own side had given her most signs of affection, "I don't see what there is for you but to marry a girl of a certain fortune." "Oh, that's not my line. I may be an idiot, but I'm not mercenary," the young man declared. He was not an idiot, but there was an examination, rather stiff indeed, to which, without success, he had gone up twice. The diplomatic service was closed to him by this catastrophe. Nothing else appeared particularly open. He was terribly at leisure. There had been a theory, none the less, that he was the ablest of the family. 2 of his brothers had been squeezed into the army, and had declared rather crudely that they would do their best to keep Maurice out. They were not put to any trouble in this respect, however, as he professed a complete indifference to the trade of arms. His mother, who was vague about everything except the idea that people ought to like him, if only for his extraordinary good looks, thought it strange there shouldn't be some opening for him in political life, or something to be picked up even in the city. But no bustling borough solicited the advantage of his protection, no eminent statesman in want of a secretary took him by the hand, no great commercial house had been keeping a stool for him. Maurice, in a word, was not approached from any quarter, and meanwhile he was as irritating as the intending traveller who allows you the pleasure of looking out his railway connections. Poor Lady Greyswood fumbled the social Bradshaw in vain. The young man had only one marked taste, with which his mother saw no way to deal, an invincible passion for photography. He was perpetually taking shots at his friends, but she couldn't open premises for him in Baker Street. He smoked endless cigarettes. She was sure they made him languid. She would have been more displeased with him if she had not felt so vividly that someone ought to do something for him. Nevertheless, she almost lost patience at his remark about not being mercenary. She was on the point of asking him what he called it to live.